Thank you, Trevor. Michael, can I get you to pop back to slide 22, the one with the engagement opportunities in the table? Because I'm anticipating a question that's coming. We're going to move to questions. And what I want to reiterate is whether you spend time with a workbook or you choose to come to a workshop, it's the same content and the same questions. And then you get to choose what feels best to you. You might be the kind of person that I just want to spend time on my own and I'm going to do the workbook. You might be the kind of person that's like, I want to rub shoulders with other people just like me or some other Edmontonians, or I want to have direct access to people like Trevor and the team that are working on the bylaw. And you might say to yourself, I really want to get to a workshop. But the content in each of those are going to be the same. So there's 3 different workbooks and there's 3 different workshops. And I know that some people are going to use the workbook to get ready for a workshop, or some people are going to go to the workshop and you'll have lots of opportunity to leave your ideas there. For some people, it'll be enough to leave your ideas at the workshop. And some people are going to say, I've got more I want to say. And you may grab a workbook and then keep going in a workbook. So there's different combinations here of ways you can slide in with the content. The main idea that Trevor said that's really important is if you ever look at one of those workbooks, you're going to see workbooks 1 and 3 are about 20 pages, but it's not all material for you to work on. There's just a few pages. There's a lot of setup material. Workbook 2, I'll be honest, is the nasty one. It's the big one. I think it's almost 40 pages, but it's because that second topic in there about, or that second idea about regulating land uses based on common land use impacts, we've pulled out 5 specific ideas that we know people are going to want to speak to. In any of these workbooks, like if you're not paying attention to a particular topic, you don't need to answer it. So that's our other invitation, is spend time where you feel you have something you would like to contribute. And if you're not interested in a topic, then just leave it be. Please do not feel obligated to spend time on something that is not where your attention is. Okay, so Michael, if you can drop down a couple slides and we'll just get into some questions. And I want to reiterate that there are 2 ways for you folks to ask questions about engagement right now. Next slide, please, Michael. There's 2 ways. One is please use the chat to ask a question. So that's on the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer or a laptop. If you touch on your screen, if you're on a tablet or a phone, the option for chat will come up for you. So you can write your question. The other thing you might want to do is speak your question. And if you'd like to speak your question, I can see everybody. I've got a nice big screen. And if your video is on, I can see you. Just wave your hand and I'll call on you. The other way is if you click on the participant icon on the bottom of your screen, you'll see an option to raise your hand in Zoom, and I will see you there also. And then I can call on you. And I see Eve, I think, has a question in the chat. So Eve, I'm just going to read out your question, and then Trevor and Livia and Elaine, I see your hand too, so I'll get to you. So Eve's question is, so the workbooks can be submitted to the bylaw team. By what kind of deadline? These are really tight timeframes. And Trevor, I'm going to turn that over to you, please.
Yeah, so we're asking that you submit it by July 7th. That's when the Engaged Edmonton site closes. If that date passes and you haven't yet submitted it into Engaged Edmonton, or sorry, submitted it according to the instructions for where we say to submit it, that you can email it to the Zoning Bylaw Renewal website, or sorry, Zoning Bylaw Renewal email address. This is an ongoing piece of work that we're working on through this initiative, and once this engagement window is closed, we will continue to be working. It's not too late for us to receive it, but we would prefer to receive it by July 7th.
Okay, thank you for that, Trevor. I'm going to come to Elaine next for a question, and I just want to highlight that this is a really good opportunity right now. If any of you are thinking, I know I'm really interested in X, and then ask us which workbook or which workshop would be the best one for me to go to, given what I'm interested in. This would be a good opportunity for you. So let your mind wander and think about what you know is important to you, and then we can help direct you to the right resource or the right workshop so that you make best use of your time. Okay, Elaine, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Where did she go?
Okay, here I am. I had a sticky mouse. Yeah, I had a sticky mouse. Trevor gave us some information that I found rather vague. There, for example, the 15 zones rather than the 25, that I understand. But when it was like reduce the 15 residential zones to 5, and then he only mentioned the 3 that were presented in the discussion paper. So what other residential zones are you thinking of? And are in the reduction from, and this is sort of a separate question, but related, in the reduction from the number of zones was originally to 15 and it's now 25. Does that mean you're considering more than one commercial zone? Because one commercial zone was giving me great angst. You know, like what I want in my neighborhood commercial shopping center wouldn't be a used car sales opportunity to fill the parking lot, which no longer needs to provide parking spaces.
Okay.
So that's what I'm looking for a little more meat on what you're saying.
Okay, so Elaine, I'm going to get Trevor to tell you where to go. A little bit of an answer, Trevor, but then where to go to get more meat.
Yeah, well, so the answer is, as I mentioned, we're working through this process like in real time. So we're here, and as we even since we published these workbooks, we continue to be working on this question of what are the different contexts in Edmonton that we need to be supplying a particular zone to. So to answer about the commercial, yes, we're looking at options for different commercial zones. For residential, the reason I named 3, I named the 3 that we're feeling pretty, 3 of the zones that we're feeling pretty strongly about, but that's still a continuation of, sorry, when I say the 3 residential zones, that's still a continuation of what we proposed through the discussion papers. We are also looking at other residential zones in response to the context analysis that's being done with our consultants. So we're looking at different contexts, but I think that what we're looking to hear from the likes of yourself and others is what are some of, and the workbooks will go through what these questions are that we're prompting you on. But we're asking for you to provide an example, just like you did in that commercial example. Like that would be a case of some information that will help us to determine our next round of what that zone proposal is. So the workbooks are really like, that's the information that we can provide at this time. And we have a general number. We said 20 to 25. It's not because we have a specific number in that range. It's because we're still in that area of trying to figure out what's the right composition of zones.
So Trevor, I'm hearing you say it's a work in progress and you're looking for some more input to finalize things. Livia, go ahead, and then I'm going to answer Anthony's question that's in the chat. Go ahead, Livia.
I just wanted to mention in the one workbook on zones, on page 16 of the workbook, Elaine, there is an illustration there that might be helpful for you. So it's page 16 of the approach to zones workbook.
Great, thank you, Livia, for that. Okay, Anthony's question is, if I had worked on the workbooks, how do I know if my feedback was noticed? Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get a lot of feedback throughout this process, and we'll be compiling a what we heard report to follow this round of engagement. So, you know, I think that we're individual feedback. We can't be reporting back on an individual level, but what we'll be doing is reporting on a more holistic level, the things that we've been hearing about, and we'll be providing some indication of how we've responded to what we've heard.
And awesome. Thank you, Anthony. And I can add Michael, who's on the call here looking after the slides. He's part of my team, Anthony. And my team is going to be charged with collecting all of the data in the workbooks, the workshops, any other kinds of meetings that might take place. And we'll have basically kind of a raw data document that so you would be able to go and see your specific comments, not with your name on them, but you'd be able to find them. And then the what we heard document is going to be more of a summary nature, but it would be Trevor and team's responsibility to make sure that they use the data. And I like clients who use the information that we go to the trouble to get for them. So that's our expectation, right? Okay, Vishal, and I'm apologizing if I'm mispronouncing your name. Vishal asks, I'm interested in residential land use in the context of current area redevelopment plans. I'm guessing that's session 3. Trevor, what are your thoughts? And there are some things you're not engaging on per se, and maybe we can ask Vishal to unmute themselves and say a little bit more. Would you have a question of clarification, maybe, Trevor?
Yeah, so we're not proposing, so we're talking about the zoning bylaw, not necessarily area redevelopment plans. Is it how the zoning bylaw would relate to area redevelopment plans, Vishal?
Yeah, go ahead, Vishal.
Sorry, yeah, I should have clarified when I typed it. I guess area redevelopment plans are morphing into district plans. So I'm just wondering, like, how would district plans map to this new zoning bylaw? Because I know ARPs, they had a little bit of mapping to the old zoning. I'm just wondering how district plans are going to be mapped to this zoning. Like, what kind of wording? Like, if something's slated for low density residential, is that going to be like similar to like RF3 or RA8 in the new zoning bylaws? You know, just I live in a place where there's a lot of development pressures. Just so there's transparency, so the community knows what can be built and developers know what they can build.
Okay, thanks. That's a good kind of tracking question. Trevor, how about a really brief response? And then if there is a workshop or workbook that makes the most sense for Vishal to spend his time in, then let us know what that is so we can make the connection to the engagement opportunities. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the closest is workbook 3. I think that, you know, the depth of information that you're asking is probably in terms of the zone equivalencies, like, is it RF3 or RA8? That's not information that we have available yet, but in terms of how would we be responding, there are different ways we're looking at. One of them is a context modifier, but I'm already, even as I said that out loud, I'm realizing that's more depth than we're looking for at this phase right now, or this session. So okay, we are looking at ways to tie our zoning bylaw with our long-term planning documents, including the district plans and ARPs.
I'm hearing you say you have a lot of balls in the air. You're juggling quite a few things. Okay. Sure. Trevor, this next question makes sense for you too. It's from Bill Marshall. At some point in this process, will there be an opportunity to give input regarding infill house zoning? So he's thinking about height and setbacks. So where would it make sense for someone interested in infill house zoning, height and stuff?
Yeah, so the best time to get into that level of detail will be in January of 2022 when we have a draft bylaw to circulate. Prior to that, through this process, I'm just trying to think if one of the workbook questions lends itself to that type of feedback. I believe it would. I'm trying to figure out exactly where in that workbook would be, but the feedback, the input that you would like to give on height and setbacks may be possible through this workbook. I'm just trying to find it.
Okay. Okay. In the meantime, I'm just checking the chat. There's several questions here, and Jason, I see you tracking Eve's comments and suggestions here too. So Jason, I'm gonna ask you in a moment to look at what Eve is saying and see if there's a question that we need to put to Trevor or Olivia or Eve yourself, you could. And I just want to check in with Susan right now because I see your hand raised, and then I'm going to go to Nicholas's question. Go ahead, Susan.
Thank you. I'm just interested more specifically in the park plan and the various different zones for parks and permission on parks, and if bylaw 2202 will be morphed into some of what you're working on with the different zones. And so I'd be interested in knowing if there's a workbook or a workshop that would be, I guess, more, and I know that it's really kind of small area and all the work that you're doing, but that's kind of where I work, and I work with the NRCs and other community groups, right, with their project requests. So it's really helpful to understand the different zones and what's happening down the road with regard to parkland and parkland use.
Yeah, perfect question, because you want to know where to best spend your time. Perfect. Trevor?
Yeah, and I think in the workbook 1 on the total reduction in the number of zones, that would be the place to give some feedback related to parks that you'd like us to be keeping in mind. I would say, to go back to that previous question on infill, the same thing would apply for the residential zone. So the residential paper or residential workbook, which is workbook 3, also has a section on the reduction in the number of zones. And so that would be a place to point out to us some of the things that you value and care about when it comes to infill redevelopment that you don't want us to miss.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Susan. Okay, Nicholas's question. Thanks for the presentation. The zoning bylaw renewal is amazing work. And then the question is, how will your team be engaging members of our community who are less likely to participate in these workshops, workbooks, or other engagement opportunities? Are there ways you will be reaching out to homeless folks, those not fluent in English, teenagers, Indigenous folks, and other groups that are often unrepresented in municipal public engagements? Trevor.
So I would actually like to pass this to Jason, if I may.
Let's see if Jason accepts. Go ahead, Jason.
Of course. Thank you so much for the great question, Nicholas. And so this is going to be something that we are going to be working with Beth and her team and the consultants on for engagement is how do we think about inclusive engagement as we move forward. We know that we would like to build a zoning bylaw for everyone, and that requires being able to reach out to a variety of different groups and demographics. And we've already started to do that with some equity engagements. In the past year, we've talked to those from BIPOC communities, those who are largely underrepresented, marginalized, not part of the conversation. But we know that this is something that we need to continue doing more of. So that is a to be determined. Stay tuned as we start to think about our engagement in the future as we have a bylaw, by just letting you know that on June 29th, as we go to Urban Planning Committee, there's going to be some reports about our equity approach to zoning, and there'll be a little summary of the engagement that we've done so far with those different types of demographics. But we'll look forward to hearing other perspectives or ideas that you might have on how we might do that.
And Jason, you met last fall with a number of community stakeholders from marginalized communities to start building relationships. There's also going to be a specific Indigenous engagement effort that is separate from what we're talking about right now for the Indigenous community. So that's also underway. And Livia, you wanted to jump in, and then I'm going to check back in with the Jason and Eve conversation to see if there was a question there. Go ahead, Livia.
Thank you, Beth. I just wanted to note, Jason had mentioned a report That's going to our Urban Planning Committee. That is on June 29th. So that's a City Council Council Committee. And it's an update report on the renewal initiative. So we are required to report to council on the progress we've made on the initiative. And so in that report on June 29th, it outlines our gender-based analysis plus and equity approach to the new zoning bylaw.
Great. Thank you, Livia. Okay. Jason and Eve, is there a question that is in the chat that we need to put to Trevor or Livia? Or is it addressed in the chat? And I think, Eve, you're probably the best person to say.
It's addressed in the chat. I was looking for resources that I can use as a community representative. And I think that's actually really vital information to know that there is pre-developed advertisements and promotional materials, so the labor doesn't fall on volunteers in the community to recruit engagement for the city, and that the city is prepared to support us in that effort. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that clarification too, Eve. I appreciate it. Okay, question from Byron. I'm going to go a couple minutes just because there's some good stuff here. Byron asks, how involved has the development industry been in this process? They do this for a living and, in my experience, generally have an outsized influence on the outcome. This can be a very intimidating process for a typical layperson. So how involved has the development industry been involved? Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, the development industry is frequently involved in the process. They are a direct user of the zoning bylaw, and they, we value the feedback that they can provide as those users. The zoning bylaw is a tool to help shape and form development, and I think it is appropriate that they have an influence. At the same time, there is, we've got these workshops coming up that are open to everyone. We are constantly we are open to receive comments from others, and we will be seeking other ways in part, as Jason laid out in his previous response, ways for people who aren't part of the development industry to submit their input and to have influence over this process as well. So I think that there's room for all voices, and we're doing what we can to try to accommodate that.
One of the lenses that I apply to engagement processes, Byron, is to imagine that there are 4 different perspectives in the city, and they all are legitimate. One is the voice of the regular citizen. One is the voice of the people who do the technical work, like Trevor and Livia are doing, because they have a different role to play. The business community has a role to play because they're the ones that actually go out and build it. They're really good at testing to make sure if the rules make sense or not. But the 4th voice is also our community organizations, who are kind of like the conscience, saying, hey, this doesn't work, this does work. And we want to make space for all 4 of those voices to participate. And none of those are homogenous either. None of those are one singular voice. It's just a different perspective to look at. And within each of those perspectives, there could be lots of points of view. Quick question for you, Trevor, from Byron also. Will overlays such as the mature neighborhood overlay still be used going forward? Or will this bylaw renewal eliminate these kinds of overlays? And I think this is an opportunity for you to say, if you're interested in the mature neighborhood overlay, come to workshop or go do workbook. Which one is it?
Yeah, workbook 3 and the workshops oriented towards residential development. That is a time. I will say briefly, overlays are a tool that we will continue to be using in the zoning bylaw. We're proposing to move some of the key regulations within the mature neighborhood overlay into the residential zones themselves. Which regulations, and in what form is yet to be determined. But as a tool, the mature neighborhood overlay is something that we're proposing to transition into the zones themselves.
Okay, thank you for that, Trevor. I can see Susan and Eve and in the chat have been offering up some good ideas about how the city can connect and enable folks like yourself in the community, give you some materials that you can go and use. So as Eve said, as volunteers, you're not doing the labor to create information. Stay in touch with Jennifer Renner, whose address is in the chat, jenniferrenner@edmonton.ca. Jason is also a good contact. Karina here is a good contact. Anthony, you have a vital question. Will it be possible if we could invite a member of your team, like Jason, to meet with our community, which is the Chinatown area? Jason or Trevor, would one of you like to respond to Anthony? And of course, anyone listening right now or listening later might have a similar question about your availability to meet with different community groups. What do you have to say on that? And then I think we'll move to close.
I will say I don't know what the possibilities might be at this time for meeting with specific organizations and groups. Jason?
Yeah, no, and it's really great to hear so much interest and excitement around the engagement workshops. And this really is the first go at it, and there's going to be continued engagement once we have a physical bylaw, but of course there's an appetite to share some information now. So we would recommend that, you know, folks go to these workbooks and workshops and share information there. But just letting you know, Anthony, that we are also actively right now thinking about what our targeted engagement will look like throughout the summertime. So thanks for identifying your interest, and we'd be happy to connect with you after this once we have some plans materialized.
So I think for now, Anthony, request received. And anyone listening in, and in the meantime, Anthony, I'm thinking if there's a group of people that wants to really roll up your sleeves, use that workbook as a guide, and you could use the questions in that workbook and sit as a group of people, small or large, whether it's on Zoom or outside in a park, because now we can do up to 20 people physically distanced. You could meet and use the workbook and have a conversation. And then Anthony, you could submit the responses and say, these 22 people provided these responses and we can use that. So that would be another creative way to do that. Michael, can I get you to go to slide 22? And then just by way of closing off, I want to reiterate that there's these 3 different workshops or 3 different workbooks, and there's specific ideas that we're going to be discussing or exploring in each of those workbooks. So workbook 1 was about the approach to zones, and that's the one where Trevor was mentioning we're looking at a hybrid form-based zoning and use-based zoning. And then the second idea is just reducing the overall number of zones in the whole zoning bylaw. If you're interested in those things, that's workshop 1. The first one is on Monday, and then Tuesday the next week, or you could do the workbook, or you can do some combination. So workbook 2 or workshop 2 is there's 3 big ideas in that one. One is how land uses are going to be defined more broadly. The second idea was around regulating uses based on impact, and that's where there's about 5 special topics in there. So things like crematorium, nightclubs, breweries, pawn shops, just some specific hot topics that we know people want to pay attention to. And then the third idea for workbook 2 or workshop 2 is the changing discretionary uses to conditional uses. And then workbook 3 or workshop 3, 2 ideas. One is to reduce the number of residential zones, and the other was to reduce the number of residential uses. And I recognize that this is getting really technical. What's the difference between a zone and a use? Hopefully in the workbooks, we've made things simple enough. We realize and understand that there is accessibility issues with the zoning bylaw, even talking about it at all. But this is a test, this engagement, because one of the stated objectives that Livia said off the top is that she didn't use these words, but we're trying to aim for a zoning bylaw that is plain language. So we have to start practicing using plain language in the engagement. And when we're not, we're open to being told this is not plain language. Okay. So the link in the chat to Engaged Edmonton has is where to go to get the workbooks. And it's also where to go to register for one of the workshops. And Trevor said this earlier, but I want to make it really clear. If you're interested in any of those workshops, choose one of the workshops, because we're going to do the same thing twice.